I think my toxic hobby trait is I look at anything in the hobby and I think, I can do that. It's not that hard. I could probably do that in like 10 minutes. It does not take 10 minutes. I can't do it though. My ego is not totally unjustified. So that's kind of how I got myself a good lesson in proper time estimation. I decided I wanted to make this cowl dress for Lumia, my imple doll Lydia. And making a cowl dress is easy, right? The first thing you have to do is take measurements. You need the overall dress length and then a few other length measurements. These are gotten by measuring down from the shoulder to find the distance to the bottom of the arm, the fullest part of the bust, the narrowest part of the waist, and the widest part of the hip going around the bottom. Then you need some horizontal measurements, the circumference of the neck, the width of the shoulders, the circumference of the bust, the circumference of the waist, and the circumference of the hips. Your dress can be as long as you want, but I want mine to be down to her ankles. So I started my pattern the usual way, rolling out some easel paper, using the side of the paper for the center of the pattern, and drawing a square line up to create the top edge. A dress like this is super easy to draw out and design, but I had an unexpected issue that both slowed me down and reminded me why I don't really share the pattern drafting process. To make a cowl dress, you'd mark 1/4 of the neck circumference and half the shoulder width on the top line, and then 1/4 of the neck measurement, the bust depth, waist depth, hip depth, and overall length on the center line. After those are placed, you'd measure up from the center line parallel to the top line and place the corresponding measurements for each part of the body. 1/4 of the bust circumference on the bust depth line, 1/4 the waist circumference at the waistline, and 1/4 the hip circumference at the hip line. These lines get connected to create the hourglass silhouette of this pattern, and the neck gets rounded out. But this is the part where drawing patterns always gets me hung up, because what works for humans, which is what most resources teach you, just doesn't really work for dolls. Usually you'd drop the shoulder measurement by a standardized amount based on what you were making, but dolls aren't a standard size. And there are a lot of ways to draw the armhole for a human outfit, but the normal one I use is to take 1/4 of the bust measurement minus an inch or two, and that should be the size of the sleeve opening. This is easy and tends to work well on people, but dolls don't follow the rules. And even though I know this, I went into this pattern trying to apply human fitting rules to dolls. The beginning part of the pattern was pretty simple, the neck was easy, the shoulder is nice and narrow, but I had a hard time deciding how much to drop the shoulder to make it lay nicely. If you drop it an inch for a person, how much do you drop it for a doll? How big is the doll? How steep is the shoulder angle? Ultimately, I just made something up, like 6 or 7 millimeters, and decided it was a good enough angle for this dress just by eyeballing the shoulder slope on my doll. Can I give you directions for how to pick a shoulder slope angle? Nope, I sure can't, because every doll is different and there are no rules for us here. It's all trial and error, and you can get close following human rules, but dolls don't follow human rules, and there's nowhere this is more evident than in the extreme hourglass this doll's measurements give me. So I found myself looking at the armhole and thinking, there's no way this is right. There's no way this is gonna fit this doll. This looks way too big. But I still tried to do it, abandoning my usual method and instead trying one where you mark the arm depth and then divide that measurement in half to find where the bottom of the arm should round out. But as soon as I drew it in, I knew it didn't look right. And I kept trying to compensate and make what I know about human patterns and doll patterns work out in my head, but it wouldn't go. And my pencil's eraser didn't work, so there's that. Ultimately, I finished the armhole line with a mess and figured I'd come back to it later. I want this dress to have a slit up both sides, so I marked the slit placement and added extra width there for including a rolled hem at the edges of the slit. Then I went back with a French curve to smooth out some of my lines, and that armhole is still giving me grief, but I'll just have to fix it later. There's a lot of drafting and adjusting and redrafting and adjusting that goes into pattern making, and it's full of places like this that are just messed up and ugly, and having a pattern that fits perfectly the first try is unrealistic, but I feel like a lot of us hold ourselves to that expectation. So I cut out my pattern with a 1/4 inch seam allowance so I can drape it on my doll and see what I did wrong. The main problem with this is that while there are people with measurements like this in the world, it's pretty unusual. If she were a person, she'd have a 20-inch waist and wear a J-cup bra. Doing things the standard way was never going to work, and trying to force it left me with a large gap at the arm. What I should have done instead was mark the arm depth, connect it to the bust line so I had a nice square spot, and then round out the shoulder mark to this armhole point, and then take in the side under the arm as needed during the fitting and tailoring step of creating the actual dress. This wouldn't fit too well on a human, but dolls are plastic, so you can do weird stuff, and they don't care if the armhole rubs a little underneath their arm. To save my pattern, I can just move the arm side out far enough to shrink that gap. Since the front of the dress will hang, I don't need to worry about correcting anything else. After I have the front piece traced, I mark the bust depth and cut the pattern along that line, but not all the way to the edge. I'll cut out the top portion here, and then this is how we create the cowl neck for the dress. From this split, the top of the dress can swivel upward and outward to create a big gap. I slide in a piece of paper underneath it to patch up the hole, making sure its edge is lined up along that center line. The cowl front is created by angling the top of the pattern outward until the distance from the center line to the shoulder line is equal to the amount of plunge you want. I want this to show all the doll's cleavage, and from the top of her shoulder to the bottom of her bust is 11 centimeters. So I need the space from the center to the shoulder line on this pattern to be 11 centimeters as well. The top edge then becomes a straight line. The original piece I corrected becomes the back. I want this dress to have a deep V opening down the back, and it needs to be wide enough to slide over her hips. So I cut a V-shaped line down to the hip measurement to ensure it will open enough to get this dress on my doll to begin with. And then my pattern is done. It did not take me 10 minutes. It took more like 25 minutes because I messed up, so I might need to be more realistic with my time estimates, but hey, I can do it, right? And that's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.